It wasn't just the fans and the media. Even players on the Diamondbacks, the team Corbin Burnes ended up signing with, thought that he would end up on the Giants. But Corbin Burnes himself said the Giants' efforts to sign him were just not comparable.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, hosting the show since prior to the 2019 season, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. And coming up on today's show, I know we said on Friday we're going to do a Mailbag Monday, and then yesterday on Monday we said we're going to do Mailbag Monday on Tuesday, and now on Tuesday I'm telling you we're doing Mailbag Monday on Wednesday because I forgot to put out the prompt, but I put it out this morning. So the questions have been rolling in. This other material was ready to go, and the order, it was either going to be this tomorrow or Mailbag today, so the mailbag will be tomorrow. Your questions, I will get to them. But we've got a lot to get to today, including Corbin Burnes speaking with Susan Slusser of the San Francisco Chronicle and saying, the title of her article that she wrote was New D-back Corbin Burnes on Giants' efforts to sign him. Quote, not comparable. So that's a attention grabber right there. And so Corbin Burnes himself, this is what he said. He said, we had some teams that were aggressive. The Giants weren't one of them. They were just kind of slow, dragging their feet. I know they felt like they had something, but I mean, the offers that we were seeing from San Francisco were just not comparable to anything we were getting elsewhere. We were happy with where we ended up, but that was one of the teams that was not super aggressive. They just kind of hung around, end quote. And so my first reaction to this, I have a lot, but one of the first ones that comes up is I'm just imagining the outrage there would have been if this was not Buster Posey, but if it was the previous regime. I don't want to always be making comparisons, but this is the kind of thing where if we read this, and also, though, ultimately, there's a large portion of fans who I think understand there's probably a significant portion of this is like ownership, and that's where there's a common thread, and that could be it, although, like, we don't know at what point the Giants were just kind of hanging around and dragging their feet. There are more details later on, courtesy of Susan Slusser. But we also read a report from Susan Slusser just recently that the Giants tried to trade for Luis Castillo, who, Corbin Burnes got this deal from the Diamondbacks. It ended up being a 6-year, $210 million deal. So that's an average annual value of about $33 million a year. So, okay, $33 million. And I guess there's, I don't know, it says $35 million a year. So maybe he has an opt-out, and maybe that changes the value. I don't know exactly where they get the average annual value numbers from. Deferred money. It's probably deferred money. It changes the average annual value. So it's actually $35 million a year, but there's deferred money. Anyway, Luis Castillo of the Seattle Mariners is making $24 million a year each of the next 3 years. And so we don't know. Maybe the Giants were trying to acquire him and have Seattle pay some of the contract. That's definitely possible, but it's not like there's a huge difference between $24 million a year and $35 35, but it's not really 35 because a lot of the money is deferred, so it's really more like 33. So anyway, it could just be that they didn't value. There are certainly red flags if you look at Corbin Burnes. I still wanted that Giants to sign him. I still thought the Giants were going to sign him. The Diamondbacks players, we're going to hear in a second, thought the Giants were going to sign him. Like his strikeout rate. Starting in 2021, 2020, let's throw it out. So partial season. 2021, strikeout rate for Corbin Burnes, 35.6%. The next year, 30.5%. So a 5 percentage point drop. The next year, 25.5%. Another 5 percentage point drop. And then last year, 23.1%. So a 2.4 percentage point drop. So overall, from 2021 to 2024, 4 seasons, it dipped 12.5% or percentage points. And that's alarming. I mean, it's pretty alarming, especially when you're talking about a guy who he's 30 years old and it's a 6-year, $210 million contract. Let's not forget, the D-backs came out of nowhere and signed Zach Greinke, and it was a good deal in the beginning, but then it, as long-term deals for pitchers, and I would count 6 years as long-term, they traded him away because they wanted to get out from underneath it. So they may feel great about it right now, but we'll see. And I don't know if that's why the Giants, maybe they were just freaked out by that. I don't know the reason, but the fact is we're getting concrete feedback from Corbin Burnes himself about this, and so that's noteworthy for sure. So continuing on, Slusser writes, the Diamondbacks agreed to a 6-year, $210 million deal with Burnes on December 27th, the biggest contract in club history. The Giants wouldn't offer as many years, so they wouldn't go 6 years, nor were they even remotely close to the $200 million mark, or even a similar average annual value for the years they did offer. So they're offering fewer years and less per year. Normally it goes the opposite way. If you're offering fewer years, the average annual value is higher. But fewer years, of course, if you're offering fewer years and a lower average annual value, you're not close to the $200 million mark. But she says, nor were they remotely close to the $200 million mark. So maybe off the record, he told her exactly what the offer was. That would be my guess, which I wish I could know, but we don't know. I don't know. But that's what she writes. And then Arizona starter Zach Gallen, the guy who wears the glasses on the mound, the goggles, the Oakleys, whatever, said, quote, I thought he was going to the Giants for sure. Great park, ties to the Bay Area with college, and that would have given them a really good staff. I'm glad it worked out the way it did. He's in our division, but doesn't go to a rival. End quote. So that's never what you want to hear, is an opposing player in your division saying, I thought he was going to the Giants for sure, and that it would have made, it would have given them a really good staff. And he's right. I mean, that's why we all thought it. But no, wasn't to be. And then Corbin Carroll, the young star outfielder for Arizona, said, quote, I didn't even know he was a possibility for us. It sort of came out of left field. We all thought he was coming to the division, but I didn't think it would be for us. Obviously, we're incredibly excited. And so, just speculation on my part, but when he says we all thought he was coming to the division, I think he's thinking the Giants. It's obviously not the Rockies, and I don't think anybody really thought the Padres. All the reports about what the Padres were going to do was that they were going to cut payroll. And for the Dodgers, they signed Blake Snell very early on. It didn't seem like they were going to be major players for Corbin Burnes. They were never really tied to him. So it seemed like Giants and all of the Diamondbacks thought so. So strange. And I'd love to get an explanation, but of course we never will. It could just be cheap ownership. It could be. It could be they just have serious concerns about the declining strikeout rate that I mentioned over the course of 6 additional seasons. What's going to happen? So we don't know how the contract will age, how Corbin Burnes will age, nor do we know why the Giants were not aggressive, in Corbin Burnes' own words. So anyway, we'll move on to Mike Yastrzemski, who is treating this year as what it very well may be his last in a Giants uniform. So we'll get into what he has to say about all that in just a minute, and before we do. All right, as promised, we're going to get into a little story about Mike Yastrzemski in what very well may be his last year in a Giants uniform. I even went so far yesterday as to say it could be his last season in the major leagues. Maybe that's a little extreme on my part, but players get squeezed out. And if you're just kind of like fringy, I'm sure he could pick up a 1-year platoon deal somewhere on a Pirates team or something like that. No, for sure. Depending on how this year goes. So that's a little harsh of me to have said. But anyway, he's treating this year like it very well may be his last year with the Giants. And I think it is a definite possibility that it is. So thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're back to Monday through Friday until we go to 3 days a week in December. So a long way to go until then, all season long, Monday through Friday, we've got you. And everydayers, tomorrow, I promise you, it's going to be Mailbag Monday on Wednesday. We will get to your questions. The prompt is already out there on Twitter and on YouTube. Forgot to put it on Blue Sky, but I'll try to remember to do that as well. But Twitter and YouTube, you can find the prompt and ask a question. Anyway, this is another Susan Slusser article titled, "How is Giants' Mike Yastrzemski approaching a possible swan song in SF?" And I think it's the first line of the article says, Mike Yastrzemski is approaching this season as if it's his swan song with the San Francisco Giants. And he's going to relish every moment. And then Yastrzemski himself says, part of what I'm excited about is the freedom of that, not really having to stress about anything, because I don't want to be thinking of what ifs, the Giants' longest tenured player said. I'm going to play this year as if it is my last year here and really enjoy it. Have fun, go win ball games, because this is where I've had every single big league memory I've ever had. This team means a lot to me. The city means a lot to me. The fans mean a lot to me. I'm going to go out and give it my best effort like it's my last chance to play for them. And as you'll see later, he just has always had that attitude about just being a major leaguer, not taking it for granted. And it is kind of wild that he is the longest tenured Giant. Who would have thought when he first debuted as a 28-year-old rookie in 2019 after toiling away in the minor leagues in the Orioles system for a long time, and the Giants trading for him in the first offseason under the new regime at the time, led by Farhan Zaidi, and now he's their longest tenured player, entering his 7th season with San Francisco. So it's just a success story, just from a personal standpoint. And what I love is that he's made some money, now at this point. He has made in his career, this year he's making $9.25 million. And you might think that's an overpay. I've explained that it's not. Given what players make on the open market, it is, they would have had to pay more for a free agent than that for the same level of production. So $9.25 million this year. Last year he made, this is all through the arbitration process, $7.9 million. So we're talking, almost 17, $18 million right there. And then the year before that, he made $6.1 million. So we're 23-ish. I'm just kind of doing math on the fly here. And then 3.7. So 26 and a half. So he's made his money. He probably thought that was never going to happen, and then it was league minimum stuff. So $26-ish million that he's made from the Giants and change, because all of his pre-arbitration years he still made hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I'm just happy for him as a guy who was 28 and had never had a major league opportunity to finally get that chance and to then make almost $30 million and hit over 100 major league home runs and be the longest tenured player on a team like the San Francisco Giants. It's just a cool story, even if it's, he's like the new Brandon Belt in a way. Like, fans kind of have been divided on him for a long time. But Slusser writes, Yastrzemski is the sort of player who is valued most by those who see him every day and by overall metrics. He plays right field gracefully in a tricky ballpark for it. He was 4th in the majors in assists by an outfielder last year and had an NL best 5 defensive runs saved in right. He's a superb base runner. He's an excellent teammate. Jung-Hoo Lee calls Yastrzemski his big brother. He's smart, steady, friendly, accountable. What he doesn't have are the things baseball fans and other teams demand from a corner outfielder: big offensive numbers. And then Bob Melvin said, you look at overall numbers, and these, we're talking counting stats here, like home run totals, RBI totals. Bob Melvin said, you look at his overall numbers, and again, counting stats, not rate stats. Like, batting average is a rate stat, although he's not great in that area. But he is good with, solid on base. Slugging is pretty good. That's where he's above average. And Melvin says, you look at the numbers and they're somewhat affected by being platooned. Counting stats are, of course, affected by playing time. Guys like him who buy into what the team needs, number one, that's very much appreciated. Number two, I don't think that some of the defensive metrics give him the credit that he deserves, especially in our ballpark, which is a place nobody really wants to play right field, and he does it beautifully. Last year, the offensive numbers increased as the season went along, especially at the end. He can hit some home runs at our ballpark, which for a lefty is hard to do as well. He's just kind of all in for the team, and I would agree that maybe it's underappreciated. And then Yastrzemski said some interesting stuff himself. He said, I think in the grand scheme of baseball, that's a pretty big trend, where it's gotten so analytical that sometimes what people think wins ball games or wins games isn't necessarily what's actually happening. So that's an interesting line. We'll get back to that in a second. He says, I think the ability to go out there and play every day and play hard is probably one of the number one things that needs to be looked at and understood, and how important that is. Consistency, which is interesting because he's not been consistent. And there was another article, I think, by Maria Guardado that we talked about recently. And in that article, he said that one of his, he said his 2 goals were to play, to stay healthy, and to be more consistent. So it makes sense that he's kind of repeating that here. But he's saying it in a slightly different way, saying that those are the most important things in a player. So it makes sense that that's what he wants to do. But you can be consistent and stink, and that's not good. So you got to be good too. But when he says it's gotten so analytical that sometimes what people think wins games isn't necessarily what's actually happening. And so I'm not actually, I first read this a certain way, but now after that second part of what he said, I'm wondering if he's thinking the analysts have it wrong, or if he's thinking the fans might not understand that, my batting average is 239, or in his career 231, last year 233, the year before that 214, 224. I mean, the batting average numbers are just not going to wow you at all. But I will remind you that league average is around 242 lately, so keep that in mind. He's not that far below the league average when he's hitting 233, but he makes up for it with power, not with home run totals and RBI totals, but, isolated power over 200 in his career. Major league average is like 170. And so that's a good indicator that when he gets his hits, they're for more extra bases than normal. And he also gets on base at like an average rate. And so that's made him a slightly above average offensive player in his career. And yeah, there have been platoon splits. This is one of those perfect cases. Like 2020, people freaked out. Not only was it a small season, a shortened season, 60 games, but it's even more shortened when you're looking at platoon splits. Like, how did he do against just lefties? You're taking a small sample and then making it even smaller. And so that's why we're always saying, don't look at platoon splits in a single season. Let's look at the body of work. And in his career, Yaz has been about, you got to word this in a really specific way. Overall, offensively, it's been about 20% above average offense when he's faced righties in his career. The slugging is almost 500. The isolated power is 236. The on base is like 330. So he's good. That's where 20% above average. And if you look at against lefties, he's been about 10 percentage points below average. The production overall. On base is a little below 300, is 299. And slugging is under 400. Isolated power is 163. So there's definitely some platoon there. And that's in 610 plate appearances against lefties. Strikeout rate of 27% against lefties. And against righties, strikeout rate's just 24.9. So it's still not low, but it's lower. Walk rate 10.6% against righties and just 8% against lefties. So, yeah, he looks like a platoon player to me. He's not horrible against lefties, but this is an opportunity where I think Luis Matos or Marco Luciano or, those are the main righties who jump off the, Gerard Encarnacion can be an outfielder, did pretty well defensively in a small sample with the Giants last year. But I expect Yaz is not just going to play every day, especially when they want to give opportunities to younger players. And I'm not saying you put Matos or Luciano in the you're a platoon player forever hole or bucket. It's how you get them going. And if they play, you start a game against a lefty. Later in the game, a righty reliever comes in. You get opportunities against right-handed pitchers. You hit a home run and it was against a righty. People notice that. You get in the lineup more. That's how it happens over the course of hundreds and hundreds of at-bats. That's how it happens. So it's not putting them in the platoon box permanently. It's just oftentimes that's how young players start out and then they earn more playing time. Elliot Ramos, that's how it happened. So anyway, there's a lot more in here. Basically, he knew he might get cut loose, like non-tendered, and he wasn't. And he also knows he might get traded at the deadline if the Giants don't have a good season. And he talked about not trying to pull the ball as much. So he said, obviously, I'd like to improve my performance against lefties and make it really hard to take me out of the lineup. That's a big goal of mine. But even if I do start to play well against lefties, I understand that there are other guys who may be on the team that for that specifically. So it sounds like he knows something that we don't, like certain guys like Luis Matos or Marco Luciano may be on the team specifically to play against lefties, and he's the guy most likely. I mean, it's not going to be Jung-Hoo Lee. It's going to be Yaz. And he goes, so I'm not going to stress about it. And then he talked about, again, pulling the ball, finding some power through that, but he wants to be a little more hitter-ish and kind of use the whole field, bring back some batting average in that case. That's what I'm saying. That's largely where his success comes from, is the power, but it does come at a cost. And that's, not great batting averages or on-base percentages, although he walks at an above-average rate, which brings the on-base percentage to an acceptable level. Combine that with the power, and he's just been solid. Mike Yastrzemski on Buster Posey, being president of baseball operations. Last thing I'll say about this, he goes, it's really unique, and it's cool, and I'm embracing it. He's really straightforward. He delivers messages very well. And if you don't know what he values or what he stands for, what he believes, then you weren't listening when he was speaking. He speaks with a purpose, and he's always been that way because he certainly doesn't enjoy hearing himself talk. That's a valuable trait to have as a leader. What he says matters, and certainly true, but just interesting to hear the longest tenured Giant and an interesting Giant, a guy that people will definitely remember on Buster Posey being his boss now. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to transition to talking about an unfortunate topic that fortunately we don't have to worry about for a couple of years, but something that's looming. MLB PA expects a lockout, which isn't shocking, but it is not something to look forward to after the 2026 season. We'll get into that and get some juicy quotes about it in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing the Warriors for a late game rally, big win yesterday, or picking a player to hit a clutch three, a player, Steph Curry, let's be real, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, here we go. We're going to get into, it's not a topic that you shouldn't, I'm not saying turn off the broadcast. I'm saying it's just something to, it's not fun in a way, but it's something to, if you're a baseball fan, this is important. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. Everydayers coming up tomorrow. Mailbag Monday on a Wednesday, of course, naturally. Anyway, so this all started with Barry Bloom of Sportico writing, MLB Union fully expects a lockout in next contract negotiations. And this should surprise nobody, but it's still noteworthy that we're starting to hear it more as we've moved past the honeymoon phase of the other one getting done, and they did have a lockout, to now starting to feel the looming upcoming expiration on December 1st, 2026 of the current collective bargaining agreement. So Tony Clark, who is the union's executive director, said Friday morning to a few members of the media after meeting with San Francisco Giants players at Scottsdale Stadium, he said, unless I am mistaken, and by the way, we got Matt Chapman quotes about Rob Manfred, Commissioner Rob Manfred, in this, so you're not going to want to miss that. Tony Clark said, unless I'm mistaken, the league has come out and said there's going to be a work stoppage. So I don't think I'm speaking out of school in that regard. And then MLB Trade Rumors, in an article titled Clark, MLBPA expects lockout after the 2026 season, said that quote is in response to some previous comments made by Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred about a month ago. Manfred said, quote, in a bizarre way, it's actually a positive. He said this to Evan Drellick of The Athletic last month. There is leverage associated with an off-season lockout and the process of collective bargaining under the National Labor Relations Act works that exists, gets applied, works best on leverage. That the great thing about off-season lockouts is the leverage that exists gets applied between the bargaining parties. He also, end quote, MLB Trade Rumors says he also praised a lockout as being preferable to in-season negotiations, saying that it's like using a .22 as opposed to a shotgun or a nuclear weapon. Okay, those are some, that's a quote from Commissioner of Baseball Rob Manfred. So Tony Clark disagreed at the time, per MLB trade rumors, saying, quote, players know from firsthand experience that a lockout is neither routine nor positive. It is a weapon, plain and simple, implemented to pressure players and their families by taking away a player's ability to work. And I think that he's correct in that. So MLB Trade Rumors says something we all know: relations between the league and the union have been combative in recent years, and the CBA was agreed to only after a lockout, which lasted several months. The current CBA, it expired on December 1st, 2021, and the league instituted a lockout that very night. The negotiations continued in the spring, with a new deal getting done on March 10th of 2022. So from December 1st to March 10th, we were in a lockout. It caused a rushed ramp up to 2022. They did play all 162, but it was made up through double headers and a late start to the season. It was kind of a mess. And given that the relations haven't markedly improved, many in the baseball world expect another lockout, and as do I. And it seems Clark and the union are operating under that assumption. So there's a lot to say, but Manfred also added, I'm one that likes to bargain early, talking about could they try to work something out before the expiration and avoid a lockout. And he says, but we're still 2 years away, even if you're thinking you want to bargain early. We got time on that front. And I think the time is particularly important right now because we do have things going on in terms of the economics of the game, local media being the principal one, that the longer we wait, the more it evolves, the better decisions we're going to make. So he makes a point there. There are some issues going on there. But Matt Chapman, here's what Matt Chapman had to say. Well, MLB Trade Rumor says, from the players' side, they seem to be assuming that Manfred is trying to generate leverage through the press. Matt Chapman said, quote, I know that a lot of what Rob Manfred says in the media is posturing. He said recently to John Shea of the San Francisco Standard, I think they mean San Francisco Chronicle, they're all negotiating. Actually, John Shea just recently left the Chronicle, so maybe it is the San Francisco Standard. Chapman continues, they're all negotiating tactics. He tries to create his narrative. So that's cool, end quote. That's cool for me to see a Giants player just kind of calling out Rob Manfred, like by name. You're Matt Chapman, he's not a nobody. To see him just say that. But it speaks to the combative nature between the players and the league. And so that's part of why we fully expect a lockout, is comments like that. Just players are not even afraid to say this guy. I mean, imagine what he says behind closed doors and not to the press, right? If he's saying that openly to the press, then tell us how you really feel. So there's a lot more that I could get into, but basically I fully expect a lockout. It could be even uglier than this last one. The league may very well push for a salary cap. And we've discussed that in a previous episode. I'm sure the word salary cap is in the title of the episode. It was maybe a couple weeks ago, how there was an MLB Trade Rumors poll, and most fans want a salary cap and floor. And it was like a split 50-50. People would trade a whole season in 2027 in order to get it. So that's kind of wild. So anyway, the players don't want that. The league may be okay with that. We'll see. Thankfully, it's not happening right now. We have this season and all of 2026, and then we got to worry about this. But that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. Everydayers tomorrow, Mailbag Monday on Wednesday, of course. For your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball with hosts Dominic Martino and Matthew Anay. MLB fantasy draft season is here. Be the most informed fan and set yourself up for a league win. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter, X, Blue Sky, at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much, so thanks in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening today. You are now Locked On Giants.